All right, now let's go one level deeper in rooting your understanding of wine grape nomenclature. Rooting wine grape. All right, never mind. So I said that there are perhaps hundreds of species of the Vitus in the Vitus genus. There's actually a division of the genus itself. So Vitus, the genus, and there's a division called Vitis, or the true grapes, and that constitutes hundreds, if not thousands, of species all over the world. And then there's this other offshoot of Muscadinea, which are just a handful of species located just in North America. Looking at this chart, you might note that, wow, North America itself has tons of different species in Vitus. However, virtually none of them are made into wine. Not many of them are even eaten. When you go through the forests and woodlands of North America, from Canada down to Mexico, you will find wild grapevine growing all over the freaking place. And they're cool, especially in forests, because they have vines that go straight up and you can swing from them like Tarzan. I used to do that when I was a kid. And you will see grapefruit all over the place in the wild across North America. But we don't eat a lot of it. In fact, virtually none of it is really used for too much when it comes to wine. When we go over to Eurasia, you see that the species list is a bit shorter. And this is a condensed species list, by the way. This isn't every single species of in the Vitus genus. But there's a lot of them over in Eurasia as well. And I would point out that Vitus is the genus, Muscadinea and Vitis are the sub-genera, and then everything else listed underneath of that are species names. And you actually, for the full real nomenclature, you use the word Vitus and then the name of the species. So you'd say Vitis rotundifoliae, or Vitis labrusca, or Vitis californica. And when we see this gigantic list, I do want you to understand that all the way over in that Eurasian species column, all the way down to the end of that column, is one single species called Vitis vinifera. Dig this, my friends. That one species of the 100 or 100 other species on planet Earth is the one that accounts for 99.9% of all wine production on planet Earth. Some of the others are made into other things, but 99% of wine is this one single species. And that includes every bottle of wine you've seen in every shelf store, in the wine stores and liquor stores, that you had at every party, all from one species. Why is that? Well, before I get to the why, let me point out a couple other species. Vitis vinifera, the one of note for our entire course, that's a European species. This plays figuratively into a story I'll tell you later about how the entire world's wine production almost got wiped out. But Vitis vinifera is one European species or Eurasian species. There are some in North America, though, of note that I do want you to know. One called Vitis aestivalis, Vitis labrusca, Vitis rupustris. Those are all important, and I'll bring them up at different times throughout the semester. Oh, let me kick over to the Muscadinea column and point out Vitis rotundifoliae as well. But why is this, getting back to the question, why this one particular, when there's so many other species on planet Earth, all over the place, natural, native, all over the place, why would we all around the world be using this one species from Europe? Because it has this awesome ability to morph and to mutate and to hybridize and to do crazy things. But even before that, who cares if this thing morphs or mutates? Why don't we just take the grapes out in Granny's backyard up in West Virginia and make them into wine? Why don't we make the ones we can find on the Ohio River banks? Why don't we make those into wine? Well, what about the ones in Central Asia or in China, naturally native? Why don't we make those into wine? And the answer is, I don't know the answer. Nobody really does. You have to understand that humans, when we started doing that civilization thing 10 or 12,000 years ago, but when we went from hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists, From that point forward, humans have been picking things out of the environment they like and propagating them, or manipulating them, or hybridizing them, or crossing them in order to get the flavors and taste and aromas and things that we like. That's true for all other plants and all other animals, the ones we like. If we don't like them, they're called weeds. But all the stuff that humans have cultivated, all of these millennia, right on up to the present day, have something about them we like. It's usually flavor or taste. Okay, because look at it, pigs are disgusting, but man, they're delicious. So when it comes to all of these different grapes, these different species of grapes all over planet Earth, they all taste different. They're the basic formula, what I taught you in the previous lecture. They all have acids and sugars and tannins and these other components, but it's something about Vitis vinifera that has them in the combination that's the most appealing, supposedly or apparently, to the human palate. And when people were messing around with grapes and hunter-gathering 10,000 years ago and trying stuff, for reasons we'll never know, they liked this one. And they tried lots of others, but when it came time to settle down and be agriculturalists and start growing plants, they said, this is the one we actually want to grow. This, what we're later going to call Vitis vinifera. We don't care about that one over there. The Vitis labrusca is fine. We don't want it. We're going to use this one. And it probably was a combination of that maybe the grapes on Vitis vinifera had more sugar, and they physically tasted sweeter. They might have grown bigger. They might have grown easier. There are any number of reasons why early humans would have said, early civilization humans would have said, yeah, these are the best ones. I'd like to think, kind of think, that it's because they had really high amounts of sugar, so they were sweet to eat, but also they could be transferred into high amounts of alcohol. Again, not other fruits can do that, and perhaps other species of Vitis around planet Earth didn't do as much either. So they chose this plant. So students almost invariably ask me, well, if Western civilization would have started in, say, central the United States 10,000 years ago, would a native North American species been the one that we liked the most and we ate and it became the standard? I don't know. It's a real chicken and egg question. They used this stuff for the last 10 to 15,000 years, and it's the taste that we've all grown to like. And when you try other species of grapes, you won't like them as much. Trust me. And you can do it, by the way. There are other species that are made into wine, some, not very much. But when you go try them, it's distinct, and you know it's not Vitis vinifera, and most humans recoil at it. Okay, recoil is a strong word, but most humans, if they try a Vitis rotundifoliae, which is a grape that grows down in South Carolina and Georgia and Florida, most humans are like, oh, no thanks. There are some people down there that like it, but not the vast majority of humans. So that's why Vitis vinifera came to dominate early civilization as the fruit of choice to be made into wine. And that has continued basically for 10,000 years to the present. Now, I said that we only pretty much use 99% of all wine is from this one species. Just one. But wait a minute. When you go to the wine store, there's hundreds of different wine. Thousands, millions of different types of wine on planet Earth. How could they be from the same species? That brings up the more important point. It's not that speculative, by the way, and that is that Vitis vinifera, perhaps more than other grape species, is what I call the mighty morpher. Now we get back to that morphing, mutating, hybridizing thing. This particular plant is awesome, because not only do we like it for all the reasons we've talked about, it changes on you real fast. So the same plant material put into different environments around planet Earth will morph and adapt to the environment and slightly change their composition. Which is why, even if we only had Merlot on planet Earth, if Merlot was the only Vitis vinifera out there, you still would get great variation in flavors of Merlot wine if you plant some in Spain, some in Italy, some in Russia, some in California, and some in Argentina. They would taste slightly different. It would be a major theme you would pick up, but the differences would occur because this thing really adapts rapidly and then will morph rapidly. It also can genetically mutate on its own. And some particular grapes that we'll talk about do it readily. They're just like hanging out in the field and like, boop, genetic mutation. I taste slightly different now. And we like that. They can also easily cross-pollinate, cross-hybridize with other species and with their own species, which causes new plant material all the time. Put all these factors together on top of the humans who selectively take the types of grapes they want and then propagate them specifically. Again, we call that agriculture. You put all of this kind of mutating, morphing, natural selection, human selection together, and that's why we have a great proliferation of what we call cultivars on planet Earth. And cultivars, I do want you to know that term, cultivars are basically subspecies of Vitis vinifera. So Vitis vinifera is the species that almost all wine is made out of. But because of all the craziness that this plant will do, we have subspecies, aka cultivars, aka varieties, different varieties of Vitis vinifera. The varieties are the things you know. Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Gamay, Riesling. These are all subspecies of one species, Vitis vinifera. Isn't that cool? All of that variation within one species. I mean, humans are a species. That's the end of the story. There's no variation. I mean, I guess you could say, look at all the way that people look different and different hairstyles and eye color and skin color. I guess that's variation that's analogous, but this is wildly beyond that because we can pinpoint with such accuracy all the different flavor and aroma profiles and things that are going on in the grape. So, encapsulating what we've learned thus far, there's one genus, Vitus, two sub-genera, Vitis, the true grapes, and Muscadina, which are only located in the United States of America, North America. Perhaps 100 species of grapes all across the northern hemisphere. But this one species called Vitis vinifera has thousands of subspecies, aka cultivars, aka varieties, which is why a wine made from just one type of grape, one grape variety, is called a varietal wine. Well played. I knew you did that in your head already. And I'm just going to put up this awesome graph. It probably won't show up that good, showing the great divisions and the multiplicity of different cultivars and the subgenera and all that stuff in one family tree. Now, I have now played up the Vitis vinifera story big time. I do now want to go back and just point out a few other species of grapes that we actually do use and you actually do know about. Or you'll know more about this by the end. I mentioned by name already Vitis labrusca, Vitis rotundifoliae. And just like Merlot and Cabernet Franc and Grenache are varieties of Vitis vinifera, there are subspecies of these other grapes too. And when it comes to Vitis labrusca, there's a couple that you probably might know by name. So Vitis labrusca is a North American species, and a couple of its cultivars are Concord and Catawba. Maybe you've heard of Concord or Catawba or Niagara or Delaware. Yes, I know some of these are places / states, but these are also subspecies under Vitis labrusca. Why am I pointing out Vitis labrusca? It's actually the grape you're most familiar with in life before you started drinking wine. That's why. One of the main North American vine species, Vitis labrusca, found primarily in Canada and northeastern United States, although it does grow prolifically in South America now and other places, is the variety that you know the most because Concord grape variety is best known as grape juice and jelly and jam. In fact, it's Concord and now Niagara and Catawba are also very popular. These are the original grapes that we made into unfermented grape juice. This is more of a modern, last 100 years, especially during Prohibition. Everybody said, oh, wine is bad for you, but grape juice is good for you. Jesus drank grape juice, not wine. Yeah, the Pope didn't think so. So Vitis labrusca, to condense, is the flavor profile that you Americans think of when you think of grape flavor. Again, grape juice, grape jelly, The typical PB&J that I've heard legendary status about, never tried it myself. That jelly on that peanut butter, that would be a Concord or Niagara grape jelly. We've extracted the certain chemicals that give us this particular flavor that we call grape to now make into grape Kool-Aid and grape popsicles and grape bubble gum. When you take any of these products and take them to anywhere in Europe or probably the Middle East or maybe even China and say, here, eat this, drink this juice or eat this bubble gum, doesn't that taste like grape? No one else on the planet would know what the hell you're talking about. They'd be like, well, it tastes like candy or something, but that's not grapes. Because really, most table grapes don't taste like that. And no wine grapes taste like it. And that's because these native Vitis labrusca subspecies have a very pronounced what we call musky, grapey, foxy. I like the most often used one I understand is kind of candied strawberry foxy flavor. The sweet candied strawberry. I mean, when you drink grape juice, it's grapey, but if you had to define it some other way, because that doesn't mean anything, there's 10,000 different types of grapes. It's a kind of candied apple, sickeningly sweet flavor. That is Vitis labrusca, and again, the chemicals that they pull out of that stuff is a specific one that can be produced now. You don't even need the grapes, but that's what we call grape flavor in America. Make sense? Now there's this other one that I've mentioned a couple times already called Vitis rotundifoliae, and I bring it up mostly because it's super bizarre in that it's one from the Muscadina sub-genera, and so it's a species under Muscadina sub-genera. And rotundifoliae is fascinating to me because it has somehow maintained a presence in the southeastern United States despite all odds. So it's put off into a subgenera because the grapes themselves kind of look really different from bunch grapes, from the regular grapes you buy in the grocery store, table grapes, wine grapes that grow in bunches. Rotundifoliae in all Muscadina, they grow like single little berries stuck out on a single stem. And the berries themselves are almost like leathery. Almost like a snake egg. Ooh, that sounds gross. But when you bite into them, even when they're completely ripe, it's like you kind of have to chew out the pulp. And they actually look like olives. I mean, look at the bulb of these things. So it's a really different species than typical wine grapes or even table grapes because it's from that separate subgenus. And it's made into wine that somehow for several hundred years has been a local tradition in the Southeast. From, say, Florida to Delaware, all the way to eastern Texas and Oklahoma, these things will grow. And the main one you may have heard of that you should seek out just so you can try it is called scuppernong. Scuppernong is the subspecies or cultivar of Vitis rotundifoliae. And talk about different in flavor. Just like I said, Vitis labrusca has a kind of a foxy, gamey quality. These extreme that out even more. It's almost like sweaty animal flavor. I know if you're a big fan of scuppernong, you're all offended now, but it's a super sweety, candied, strawberry, musky, sweat on a wild boar's back type of flavor. If you don't know what that means, me neither, but you go try one of these wines and you will very quickly point out, whoa, this ain't regular wine. This ain't Vitis vinifera. So, Vitis labrusca, Vitis rotundifoliae, and Vitis vinifera are all species of grapes, Vitis vinifera being the main one for wine production. Merlot, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon are cultivars or varieties of just the Vitis vinifera species, although things like Concord and Catawba are varieties of Vitis labrusca species. That makes sense? Now, there are a few other viticulture terms I would like you to be familiar with when contemplating the awesome morphing nature of the grape and some of the wines that you will eventually encounter once you get real mad skills and start pushing out of your comfort zone to try wines and grapes you've never heard of before. So part of the other nomenclature I want you to know for this course and your life are that there are these things called crossings. Crossings. And crossings are vines bred from more than one variety of the same species. That's one of the things about species, I think maybe biologists can back me up on this, that a species by definition is something that all the creatures within it can interbreed and produce offspring. So a crossing in the grape world is when you take a Merlot and a Cabernet Sauvignon and put them together, and they make a baby. Makes no sense for vines, but you know where I'm going with this. And that's usually done quite intentionally. So vines bred from one or more variety of the same species, like Cabernet Sauvignon, which was actually a pollination cross between Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc, isn't that a white grape? Yeah. So, hey, one of the more popular grapes you've heard of is a product of a crossing. And there's also Petite Syrah. Dude, you need to try a Petite Syrah from Southern California. Petite Syrah is a cross of Syrah and Palursin, I think is the name of the grape. The Germans are really big into this, producing a number of whole new varieties just in the last 100 years, like Müller-Thurgau, Kerner, and Cherubi, I think is the name of the grape. So this is an ongoing process, and people can cross-pollinate within the same species, within Vitis vinifera, to come up with new things. That crossings are different from hybrids. And hybrids are vines and grapes that are bred from more than one species. Interspecific or interspecies breeding is hybrids. Like breeding a new plant from a Vitis labrusca and a Vitis vinifera, say. But if you're going to put together a Concord, a subspecies of Vitis labrusca, and a Merlot, a Vitis vinifera, and you put them together, that's a hybrid. You will see these referenced as American hybrid or French American hybrid, depending on who produced them and where they produced it. It's all geographic. It's called an American hybrid if an American university, places like Cornell, developed it, and it's called a French American hybrid if a Frenchie did it at a French university. And the French usually name them after themselves, where the Americans usually just name it after something in the vicinity, usually geographic. So some hybrids that you may have stumbled across or will are Baco Noir. Chambourcin is a big one on the East Coast I suggest you seek out. Cheval Blanc and Vidal Blanc, which makes fantastic dessert wine. Now, why would, and there's a bunch of other hybrids too, tons of other hybrids. Just naming some you might have stumbled across. Now, why would a viticulturalist do this? Why would you do crossings or do hybrids? Because you want to get the desired elements from both, a desired element or two from both parent plants and put them together to have a child that has all of the good traits you want. Maybe you're going to take one plant because it's disease resistant, that it has a really good resistance, say powdery mildew or some sort of fungus. And then you're going to breed it with something or cross it with something that has really good flavor. That's actually often why it's the case. A lot of the American species have really great resistance to disease. They don't taste so good, but they got really great resistance to a whole variety of pests and bacteria and viruses and diseases. The European varieties, not so much. So you take their flavors and you breed them in with American hardiness to come up with a crossing or a hybrid. You might also do it to get the, say, a higher yield. Say a subspecies of Vitis vinifera gets really high yield, and this other one has really good color concentration. So maybe you put two together to get one that has high yield and high color concentration. So that's why you do crossings and or hybrids. We'll talk about hybridization a bit more when we talk about the history of wine on planet Earth. Now, other ways to get new wine grapes, or other ways that new wine grapes pop up, is actually through sometimes natural hybridization. That is, when European plants started coming over to the Americas, some of them just went wild and out on farmsteads or whatever, and they accidentally, a European imported plant accidentally pollinated a American plant. So there are some cases that it just happened, but more often than that is that wine grapes will just pop up new dimensions through spontaneous mutation. Back to one of the starting points of this mini lecture where I said that Vitis vinifera is awesome because it morphs and mutates rapidly. And spontaneous mutation, most notably something called color mutation, happens from certain varieties, particularly Grenache and Pinot Noir and a few others, which are just prone to genetic mutations all by themselves. Nothing even needs to happen, or maybe something does happen. Maybe there's an environmental shift. Maybe it's a really dry season. I don't know the exact dimensions of why these things happen, but a spontaneous mutation, usually a color mutation, is that the parent plant will, on its own vines, pop up a different color, a lighter color or slightly darker color. Things like a Pinot Gris, which you know is Pinot Grigio. Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio and Pinot Blanc are color mutations of Pinot Noir. Wait a minute, what? You probably know this already. Pinot Noir, that's a red wine. Red grape, red wine. Pinot Grigio, that's a white grape, white wine. Color mutation. They're genetically all the same, or virtually the same. One last term in your grape knowledge, and that is clones. Yeah, I know, like Attack of the Clones, Star Wars. No, not those type of clones. Even without a grapevine undergoing any mutation, there is variation that occurs within a single vineyard block of the same plant. I think maybe it can even happen on different sides of the same vine, although I might be pushing my knowledge base there a little bit. Say when a vineyard block, say you've got like 10 acres of Merlot, 10 acres of Pinot Noir, and some crazy blight happens. A disease rips through it, or there's a really bad drought that kills 90% or 99% of all the plants in your 10-acre Pinot Noir block. Well, what survived? Whatever plant survived is somehow slightly different. And what you want to do is say, hey, wait a minute, this one Pinot Noir plant survived this powdery mildew epidemic or survived this drought, and it's alive, so we're going to take specific cuttings from that and clone it. More on this in a bit, but that's how you actually make most grapevines in today's world. The breeders and the horticulturalists and the viticulturalists and just farmers for thousands of years have seen plants that they like better because they do certain things well. Either they taste better, they survive drought, or blah, 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 blah. And so they propagate them asexually. That is, they clone them. They don't let it breed, okay? You take a clipping and you put the clipping in the ground and it grows a brand new plant, but it's a genetic duplicate of the plant you took it from. Cloning, look it up, right? So you can do that in Vitis vinifera as well because of all the things we've now talked about. There's lots of variation within the plant. And when you find ones that you like, you take it, you snip it, and then you snip it 100 more times and make it into 100 plants, and then 10,000 plants, and then 1,000,000 plants. You clone it for future replication because it has a specific trait that you really like and want to go forward with. More often than not, it's actually for flavor. Just for example, I believe there's 35 or 36 clones of Chardonnay just in France. Just in France. So people have identified, it's Chardonnay, it's all genetically Chardonnay, but certain plants do certain things, they taste better or do different things in different locations, and so you clone it and propagate. And then these things end up all over the world. I think the reason I'm teaching you this, by the way, is I have started to see some wine labels put that information on there. You may see reference to, oh, this is clone 12 Chardonnay, clone 36 Chardonnay. And I guess once you're smart enough, you can understand, oh, this one has certain elements or certain flavor profile, or it's really resistant to cold temperatures. So that's been going on all over planet Earth as well. And again, that brings us back to Vitis vinifera. This sucker is the mighty morpher. It's our main boy. It's got so much going on all the time, naturally and selectively by humans, and clonally, and mutation-wise, and it morphs to its environment wherever it's at to make slight variations once again. And you do this for 10,000 years, and that's how you have thousands, perhaps 10,000, but I don't want to ever push it that far, thousands and thousands of different subspecies slash cultivars slash varieties of this one single species called Vitis vinifera. Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, yeah, they're all Vitis vinifera. And there are now literally thousands of such specifically identified and propagated species of vinifera all over planet Earth. And here's the kicker. You probably only heard of a dozen or so. Isn't that right? When you go into the wine store or the grocery store, look at the wine shelf, you probably see no more than a dozen, maybe 2 dozen once you're really savvy. But of the thousands that are out there, hundreds or thousands available to you, there are really only a dozen that make virtually all the wine. Understand what I'm saying here. I said Vitis vinifera makes 99% of all the wine in terms of grape species. But even within the thousands of subspecies, there's really only a dozen or two that make up, I don't know, 75 or 80 or 85% of the wine that you get on the wine store shelves. Cultivars like, I'll just run through the ones I'll bet you've heard of. Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, maybe Barbera, Grenache, Merlot, Nebbiolo, Sangiovese, if you know the Italians. Malbec, I know you've heard of that. Pinot Noir, I'm positive you've heard of that one. When you kick over to whites, Chardonnay, most planted, most identified wine grape on planet Earth, Chardonnay. But there's also Sauvignon Blanc, but you've had that one too. Gewürztraminer, maybe Muscat or Moscato, maybe Semillon, Pinot Grigio, I know you've heard of. And again, next time you go into the store, look for other great names other than the ones I've just mentioned. You're going to have to seek them out. Those handful, or again, maybe even up to a couple dozen, constitute 99% of what you're going to see. Now, let me check my facts here. Let me back up. I don't mean to suggest that 99% of what's available on planet Earth is from these couple dozen grapes. No. 99% of what you see in the average wine store here in 2016 is from a couple dozen grapes. They constitute 99% of what you're going to see. They're not 99% of full production, because if you go to a place like Croatia or Greece, you're going to run into a whole slew of varietals you've never heard of before. And that's the fun of it. Even within France, you'll run into a dozen or 2 dozen or 5 dozen real quick you've never heard of. You kind of got to start looking up going, what is this grape name? Well, what does it taste like? I don't know. That's the promise of grapes. It's still ahead of you. No matter how much you've drank, there's still 1,000 varieties that you've not ever even heard of that taste slightly different than the same old you've been drinking up to this point. But again, seek it out. When you travel, only drink local. Always seek out new grapes. If you drank a new grape every day, every week, if you just tried a new grape, a new wine made from a grape you never heard of every day for the rest of your life, man, you have a decade or two of tasting ahead of you. And there'll be new ones by the time you finish all existing cultivars. There will be new ones for you to start with because of all the stuff I've been talking about with the mutation and the morphing and the hybridization and the crossing. But how do we, back to Vitis vinifera, to close, how do we actually know that all of these variations are from the same single species? More importantly, because that's a genetic thing, more importantly, why are they all from the same species? We've now talked a little bit about that. And where the heck is this species from? And how did a single species that was located in a single place on planet Earth 10,000 years ago come to dominate and now be located in virtually every country on the planet, even ones not known for wine production? Good question, and for that, we'll have to turn to some history. Let's do that now.